And we are live, and hopefully someone's watching because it's not
Showing us
obvious
anybody
yet
right
that
now.
anyone is watching.
Well, we'll just go ahead and start. And
Hopefully someone will join us.
okay.
One person has
Yay,
joined us.
we've got one
Hello,
person.
3 people have joined us.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
Now we're in the way. I'm
Okay.
Angelique Lamore,
I'm Beau Lamore.
and we are here to talk about No Traveler Returns, the Louis L'Amour's first novel that is coming out November 20th.
Something like that.
Okay. It is a co-authorship between Beau and our dad.
Okay, so just to bring people up to speed, um, when we talk about these books, a lot of times we'll the books in the Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures series. So the Lost Treasures series is a number of books that I will be adding material, all kinds of things that I know about my dad too. And so when we talk about the postscript books, these are the books that y'all are familiar with, like this, and this, and this. And when we say a postscript book, what I have done is I have added kind of an article in the back of those that are all the different things that I know about that story. In Catlow, a great deal of the Lost Treasures postscript is about the making of the movie. And in Bendigo Shafter, it's very much about the writing of the book, as are some of these others. But in, say, Callaghan,
Thank you.
The postscript in Callaghan is to a great extent about Dad doing the on-site research. So this is about us driving around in the Mojave Desert looking for the different location of the different scenes and things like that in the book Callaghan. So each one of these books has a somewhat different, somewhat different subject matter in its postscript. So that's sort of level one of the Lost Treasures series. Level two is Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures, in this case, volume one. I'm trying to angle it so that you can see it because of the light. And
Yeah, you could say that. It always ends up in front of my face, though.
Well, after I noticed that it was ending up in front of my face.
Oh, that
Actually, after I
You're
noticed
talking.
I wasn't getting it up high enough.
Okay.
Anyway, so there will be 2 books like this, Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures. These are unpublished or unfinished stories that have different elements that play different roles in Dad's career, but you guys have never seen them because they have never been published before. And in those 2 books, I also explain how those unfinished stories might have been finished and what role they played in the entirety of Dad's career, what their intention was, things like that. The final element is, at the moment, this novel, No Traveler Returns. And this is Dad's first novel, which was unfinished, and I went in and finished it. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And so this is going to be the last Facebook Live we do for a little while, probably until after the holidays at least. And so if anybody's got questions, about halfway through, we'll open the thing up for questions and we'll answer some questions live. And then once we're done with that, I'll go back through, and if any of y'all have been asking questions, like I can see somebody's asked a couple. There are a couple of questions already, but I'll come back through and I'll answer those afterwards. And so hopefully everybody will get their questions answered. And so the other thing, just kind of not really housekeeping wise, but just some other interesting things, is the Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures series or project or whatever you want to call it, has a website, which is louislemoreslosttreasures.com. And if you go there, it explains everything that you can imagine about the project, basically what I've said and a good deal more. There are also in that on that website, there are also some of these kind of unfinished stories that didn't make the cut for the book. When I put things in the books, I try to make them the most complete, incomplete stories we've got, and so some of them that were a little less finished, a little less polished, we stuck them on the website so that you can enjoy them anyway. So there's that. There's a whole bunch of interesting photographs and artists' renderings of what the Chalico Western theme park that Dad wanted to be involved with might have looked like. And there's all kinds of things on that site. But one of the things that pertains to what we're talking about today is in the part of the site called Website Exclusives. There is an area called Additional Materials. And if you go into the Additional Materials, or what we call LT Plus, Lost Treasures Plus section, there will be extra things for these various books. In this case, we're talking about No Traveler Returns today, and there are some extra things for No Traveler Returns that didn't fit in the book, and there's quite a few of my research photographs, so photos that I took of some of the locations, photos that I took of ships from the right time period. There's a blueprint of the actual ship from the story, and where I took the blueprints of a ship that were somewhat similar, and I both changed the blueprints and I also changed the story to the point where everything sort of made sense, so that I could tell where everybody was, all the different characters were at different times. Yeah, so it's sort of a map for the story. All of that is in the Additional Materials section of Website Exclusives at louislemoreslosttreasures.com. And so
now do I get to ask you questions?
Now you can ask me questions.
Okay, so the first question I have for you is why two L's?
In Traveler.
Yes.
Yes, because that's the way William Shakespeare spelled traveler. So the title, No Traveler Returns, is an excerpt from
from Hamlet.
From Hamlet, and so the meaning of the quote has a different meaning for Shakespeare and for Louis, although they're both sort of true in this story. Dad visited that particular idea, or his version of No Traveler Returns, in Bendigo Shafter, and he talked about that, his idea, which was basically that when you leave someplace and you go away, even though you may have this nostalgic feeling of feeling like it's home, when you return to that place, often you're not the same. You have changed. So although you're returning, you're almost returning as a different person.
That idea of going to your house when you're an adult that you haven't been in since you were a little kid, and everything looks so small.
Everything looks different, yeah.
Compared to when you were there. Okay, so so I came up with a couple of questions, and the two L's. Okay, I want to understand something. So, Dad started writing this in the 30s,
right? And
it sat where initially when he went to war, because you had told me that he worked on it kind of until he went.
That's right. So
World War II, and where was it?
It was in a binder in the home that his brother owned, but his parents were living in Oklahoma, and he recovered it when he had to get all of his stuff out of there when they moved to Nebraska a few years after the war. So he went to Oklahoma and he helped them pack up and move, and he kind of held down the fort on the Oklahoma end while they got up to Nebraska. They were not very healthy, and so the manuscript was in his stuff that was in Oklahoma, and so just to back up and tell a little bit of the story, prior to that, Dad started writing this novel in 1938, but in the time period that it might take to write a novel, he could write 15 or 20 short stories, maybe even more than that. And those short stories could get out to various magazines to find a publisher very rapidly. And if they were rejected, they could get back to him very rapidly, and he could turn them around and get them out somewhere else. So while a novel back in those days might have even made him a couple $1,000s. I think that's a little optimistic, but who knows? The short stories, which paid generally between 50 and 150, were more valuable because they had the potential to earn money more quickly, and he needed every dollar he could get as he could get it. And so he was constantly putting the novel down to work on short stories, which might have a better chance of paying the rent. So it was written in a very stop and go manner, and it was on and off. And I say in the book that he stopped working on it in 1942, although he may have stopped working on it sometime prior to that. I'm not sure. After late 1938, I don't believe there are any references to it any longer.
When do you remember first hearing about it from him?
Oh God, a long time ago.
Like when we were kids?
Well, not young kids,
Teenagers?
but young teenager maybe. And he let me read it somewhere in there when I was in my late teens, maybe. So I've read it. I read it on and off many times over about 40 years.
Okay, and was it when you took it on, when you first read it and when you read it again to look at actually sort of completing it, but it was a full story with a beginning, a middle, and an end? It just wasn't polished?
It was very unpolished. It definitely had a beginning, it had a middle, and the end kind of petered out, and then there were two endings. So there was sort of like
choose your own adventure.
Yeah, it wasn't really like he didn't know which way to go with it, but one chapter sort of had an ending, sort of the second to the last chapter, and then he tacked another one on, which had kind of a rudimentary ending. And I think what it was it was a sketch
of what
of the ending, but then it's a very complex novel. Louis never wrote anything like this again. It's very complexly structured. I'm not sure he even understood how complicated what he was trying to do was.
So for those of you who haven't had a chance to look at it, or
it's not out yet.
It's not out yet, but some people I know got there were advanced readers copies that went, but it's told from several different points of view. I don't even know how many. I mean, you go inside the heads of different people in the course of the story.
Yeah, it's eight or nine different characters.
And which sounds really complicated, which I think as a writer and co-author, it was for both Dad and Beau to do. As a reader, it makes sense and it works. But, if you read Louis L'Amour, you know that primarily he was writing one guy's story.
Yeah, usually his point of view was very focused. That's a good choice. This is kind of typical of a young writer. Young writers tend to do stuff that is complicated and very structured and kind of intellectual. And this book is complicated, very structured, and kind of intellectual. Also, strangely, it's the most emotional book that Dad ever wrote. It's really remarkable in that way. It is
It's
more
touching, and each character has an emotional depth to them that is fleshed out, I feel.
yeah. No, I think fleshed out is a really good way of putting it, because this is a more literary book than you generally get from Louis, and I don't necessarily always have a really high opinion of the idea of literary.
Right, right.
I think that when you look at your kind of typical paperback original adventure, um, uh, in those days, many of the writers, not just Louis, developed a really wonderful shorthand where they let the the audience was a partner in the creative experience, and so they basically just the story was almost code. It was a very bare bones experience intended to get the story ideas into the head of the reader really, really quickly, and then the reader's imagination fleshed it out. And that's brilliant, and that's exactly what you would want to do with something like prose writing. The more typical kind of literary approach is it's sort of like the writer doesn't trust the reader that much, and so they kind of spell everything out, and they write in a much more complete manner that doesn't leave it up to the imagination of the reader so completely. And this is definitely the latter type, although it's a very interesting book, and it's really got serious merits in its own way. And then, of course, the other thing is I said it isn't totally different from everything that Louis wrote. No Traveler Returns is one of the Yondering stories. So we have a new edition of Yondering coming out also this winter, and it is the first time that all of the Yondering short stories have actually been gathered together in one volume. They were always kind of scattered around before, so we've got them all in one volume. And I wrote a big Lost Treasures postscript, kind of telling the story behind many of the different stories in there. But No Traveler Returns is a Yondering story. It shares characters with some of the Yondering stories. It shares time period with the Yondering stories to a certain extent. It's set a little bit later. And it shares a lot of locations with the Yondering stories.
So it also takes place on a ship.
Yeah.
On a tanker. And when we were talking about the ways Dad went to sea, I know he'd been on a freighter, and that was
Right.
the Steadfast. And was he on sailing ships as well?
He says he was, but I kind of doubt it.
You haven't found it.
I
And then
haven't
he
found
was
it,
on
yeah.
one tanker.
Dad did sail on a tanker.
What was it carrying?
It was carrying gasoline.
So similar explosive nature.
Yeah, of similar explosive nature. It was a very different experience than this, however. The ship in No Traveler Returns is a very large modern ship for the time period, which is the late 1930s. Dad sailed on his tanker in the 1920s, and I believe he sailed on the oldest tanker in the U.S. fleet. So it dated from, I don't know,
The 1800s?
1890s or something like that. And most of its cargo of gasoline was being towed in a barge behind it.
So it wasn't on the ship with them.
Some of it was, but the majority of it
Was behind
was in the hull of an old demasted sailing ship that they were towing. So
I can't
it was
imagine
like
what happens if you hit bad seas.
They
while
did.
Towing
they did, and they had to cut the
line.
barge loose.
Then did they go back for it?
No, they didn't.
They let it stay there.
Someone else picked them up. But anyway,
They things you leave
You know,
floating in the ocean.
exactly. No, but it was
Get rid of blowing up
compared to the ship in this story. Dad's tanker experience was extremely primitive.
Right. So okay, so this is very interesting, and as a part of the Yandering stories have people show up that are based on people Dad knew.
Yes.
And No Traveler Returns is similar in that respect.
Absolutely.
There are people that Dad knew in this book.
Right. Dad, although he would occasionally use a historical character in a Western, usually in a minor role, um, he didn't really write, he didn't base characters on people that he had known in his lifetime, with only a very few handful of exceptions in all the work that he did. However, in the Yandering stories, and in particular in No Traveler Returns, a lot of the characters are based on real people.
On real people. And so, and you have some information on them, but so I want to ask you a question it's really specific to the book, but it's not really a spoiler thing. You just in the book there is this area near San Pedro called Happy Valley.
Yeah.
Which was a group of shacks that guys on the docks would stay in, as opposed to sleeping on the street, basically.
It was one place where you could do that,
other than like a boarding house.
And there were other strange little kind of shack communities in the area. Happy Valley was just one of them. There was another one called Mexican Hollywood, which was a little further down, and I have no idea why it had that particular name, but and I have no idea why Happy Valley was called Happy Valley, except an awful lot of the people who lived there were alcoholics.
And they were drinking, so they were pretty happy.
But it was.
Are we talking about like shack, no indoor plumbing, no electricity kind of shack?
Yeah, we're talking about
a place
plywood
out of the rain.
Yeah, it was a low hillside, a 30-foot or so hillside with a little bit of a ravine in it, a little water course through it, and it emptied right out on Beacon Street. It really wasn't far off of the main drag at all.
Is there any remnants of that? I mean, I know you spent a lot of time in San Pedro.
The hillside is still there, but although a lot of the hills around San Pedro have been resculpted over the years. And one of the things that I could tell actually as I rewrote this book was that Dad did not return to San Pedro after 1928, and by 1938
it was different.
Oh, they had been in there with the bulldozers and they had changed.
Well, and also
the
big earthquake had happened in Long Beach. I wonder if we should check out. There was a really large earthquake in 1933 in Long Beach that changed the way everything was built in Los Angeles and Southern California after that. Okay, so the two that are the most well known are, as far as people Dad knew that we know of, are Shorty and Pete.
Okay, so one of the characters' names is Shorty Conrad, and another character's name is Pete Brower. And Shorty Conrad was Shorty Warren in reality, and Pete Brower was Pete Boring. And these are two guys that Dad went to sea with, but not from California. He went to sea with them from Texas.
From Galveston.
Yeah.
So, okay. So, and Shorty Warren's not the singer.
Shorty Warren is not the singer. Although he is a singer.
Is he?
Yeah, and
because I looked up Shorty Warren that came up in Google search was born in 1913 or something, so he was too younger than Dad.
Yeah, he's too young. No, but the Shorty Warren in the that my dad knew used to sing like kind of country or folk songs, and while they were on their way to England, he made a banjo out of a cigar box and a broomstick and some things like this. So he was kind of musical, but yeah, no, it's not the same.
But not the same guy. And Pete Boring, and neither of them do you have information on, or not much information on in real life?
Oh, I don't know. I know a fair amount about Pete. The character of Pete Boring and the character, the real person, Pete Boring, and the character of Pete Brower in the book are extremely similar. The Shorty Conrad, Shorty Warren character is somewhat different, and when you all get the book, you can read it and you'll see how the plot requires certain things of Shorty Conrad that, necessitated him being different.
When you and I were talking, and you said this book is more of a personal nature to Dad.
Mhm.
You want to talk a little bit about his character in the book?
You mean
Who you
Who
think
he
who
was?
he
Yeah.
was in the book,
Okay.
and who he became in
Okay,
the book?
so our father is definitely a character in this book. In fact, he's three characters. In this book.
Three?
Three, yeah. Davy Jones
Oh,
was
yeah.
a young seaman, and I think actually Dad's uh, closer connection to Davy Jones is the stories that when you're following Davy, you learn stories about him sort of setting out as a hobo
Right.
and problems that he has, and just his initial naivete and kind of fears of being on the road and hopping freights and things like this. I think there was definitely a certain amount of Louis in
It's
there.
kind of a vulnerability for Dad
Yes.
to show that character, um, and have it be so similar to who he must have been when he left home.
Right, and he would never
Never
admit
Never.
to that sort of level of vulnerability. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we'll talk about the middle in a second because that's the most complicated part. At the other end of the spectrum, there is the second mate of the ship, John Harlan, is a very mature, buttoned up, kind of humble character who we both immediately recognize
Yeah.
as a guy like our dad.
Like he was when
Okay.
we were growing up, and
Yeah.
the
30
Dad that we knew.
30 years after this book was written. And the strangest part, because of that, because he included a picture of who he became, maybe not, I don't think intentionally, but somehow he included a picture of who he became.
When he grew up, Jen.
Okay, yeah. He also, the middle character is this character of Dennis McGuire. And Dennis McGuire is kind of an adventurer and ladies' man and
And he's been everywhere.
kind of BS artist. And
he was a boxer.
Right, and he's kind of full of himself. And this is definitely what Dad was like when he wrote this book. From every account, I've interviewed 70 people
Who knew
that knew him back in those days.
When you worked on it,
Yeah.
when you worked on the book, so it is seamless. I would say it's seamless. I do not see where you come in and out. I can't tell. It works
I couldn't tell.
beautifully. But I'm wondering, did you develop any of the characters? Did you feel that they were there on the page when you got the manuscript?
I didn't violate any character, but I developed I continued to develop every one of them. Yeah. When you're doing something like this, you get a vision of where something can go or what the natural extension of the trajectory of that particular character is. And your job as an author is to fulfill that trajectory. And so I'll talk about one of those in just a.
Did you have a big, blank wall with pieces of paper stuck to it?
No, but I rewrote it a lot. I went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth over it. One of the things that we were talking about last night was that this was a really, really, really ambitious and challenging book for Dad to write in 1938 when he had only just begun to write, and he was working with a manual typewriter. I mean, it was this book is so structurally complicated, and there are so many little details that have to intertwine like gears, that just doing it on a word processor was challenging.
Right.
And I don't get the feeling from the writing that he did about it, in his journal and his correspondence and things like that. I don't get the feeling that he created charts and things to see how the different characters related to one another. Let me explain a little bit of that. The theme of this story is all people are connected. And so this story is made, it follows many, not all by any means, but many of the crewmen on this particular ship. And it deals with how their lives are intertwined in a very, very delicate manner and intertwined in ways that even the people themselves don't really understand. And that theme goes very deep into this book. And the book is just a fascinating series of just sort of loop after narrative loop after narrative loop after narrative loop, showing where the stories kind of touch and intertwine and mesh in various ways.
I was saying last night that I for me, I would have had to have had like a big, almost like a family tree chart that showed where everybody was, and it would look like, you know, one of those crime, like serial killer maps where everything's leading back to the same guy, because I couldn't, I can't, I would have had like each individual character's story is their own story, but then they intermingle with the others, and it's
Well, I read it over and over and over, and
ambitious.
you also have to recognize we are doing the Lost Treasures project because I could because I recognized that I could do this story all of a sudden. It's like after many years of kind of agonizing over what I would do with it, I realized I knew how to handle it. And so it wasn't like we decided to do Lost Treasures and then I went, oh, okay, now I've got to figure out how to do No Traveler Returns. It was the other way around. I figured out how to do No Traveler Returns, and then Lost Treasures started making some sense.
Now we've gotten to just past 6:30, so
Right.
we should look at what's coming up now. We'll take questions, or actually I should say he'll take questions. Okay, I'm just sort of looking to see where we are. Did I read somewhere that some of his departure books, like Walking Drum, Last of the Breed, and Haunted Mesa, were written far before they were published in the 1980s? Was he working on any more different genre stories later in life?
Yes. So the answer to that is yes. The Walking Drum was written in 1960. Some of the other ideas, not Haunted Mesa so much, but Last of the Breed is definitely based on the Gary Powers U-2 incident when the U-2 spy plane was shot down over Russia. And that was in, I don't know, probably 1960 also. And I'm not sure that Dad necessarily decided at the moment that event happened that he was going to write a piece of fiction that dealt with it. But over the years, he thought about it, and he was also friendly with Sue Powers, who was Gary Powers' second wife. So the pilot who was shot down after he came back to the United States, he remarried. And so we knew his wife. She produced a literary event that Dad was involved with. And so I think that might have inspired him in various ways. And they knew one another, I think, starting in the early to mid 1970s. So yes, and then the things that he was working on, you might say that he was working on later in life, are a lot of the things that are in this book, Lost Treasures Volume 1. They aren't necessarily things that he was going to pick up after, say Haunted Mesa, which was the last work of fiction that he wrote. But he intended to go back to all of the stories. I mean, just because they were unfinished at an earlier time period, he intended to go back to all of these stories.
Because you've said before that some of the ways Dad would have an idea and he'd like write the first chapter, or he'd write the first several chapters, and then he'd set it aside so it was there and it was ready to go when he had the opportunity to come back, and then he'd go back to work on what he was in the middle of.
He was much more like his version of taking notes
was to start
it. And then he would leave it, almost like this thing that was sort of like teasing him or challenging him to come back to it. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, let's see. Skimming. Any plans to follow up with more of your Dad's Incredible Saga series?
No, I don't think so. The one thing that I kind of choose to avoid is things that will cause too direct a comparison. I mean, I don't particularly.
You're not going to write a Sackett story.
I don't think so. I mean, I wouldn't say no to anything. I mean, if so, but if I did, it would I would have to pick like one. Okay, and I would have to go. No, this is absolutely
The only one.
the one and only one. And if I was going to write it, then that would be, somehow choosing that one would wrap up everything. And I can't even imagine what that would be like.
It's like not doable.
So yeah.
We need to scroll.
Oh, okay. So
Let's see. Wait. Okay. Let's see. Oh, okay. Let's see. Is there any, by chance, an Excel spreadsheet with all the books listed somewhere? There, in the front of every book is a list of all the books.
yeah, and on our website, louislamore.com, the thing that kind of confuses people is that there are some publishers who take advantage of old magazine copyright and contract law, and they sort of will reprint a few of the old short stories and then give it a new title. But if you stick with the Bantam sort of / Random House, it's all one company now, editions, we publish everything. There's no missing or lost or mysterious Louis L'Amour stories out there. And so if you stick with the Bantam Random House stories, you're good, and you can find those all on our website.
Let's see. Okay, let's see. People complimenting Mom. Okay, so any questions? I'd love to have some more questions. Okay, let's see. We've got a few more. I'm just kind of going down because I know we started.
There's a question mark.
Okay, the Louis L'Amour magazine, was there ever a thing? Yes.
There was.
There was.
So
for a brief shining moment.
In the mid 1990s, for 2 years, in the mid 1990s, I managed the Louis L'Amour Western magazine, and we published new Western short stories. It was not a magazine of Louis's work. It was Louis's name and fame making a space for new writers. I think there was one Louis L'Amour short story in the whole run of the magazine that was published. But yeah, it was a great experience, and
I think you can find them sometimes on eBay.
yeah, I wish we had kept doing it. But the Dell magazines or Random House decided to get out of the magazine business, and we were afraid that we would lose control of our magazine in the transition to another owner, and so we shut it down. And I don't know that we should have.
I'd love to read more about the Clinch Mountain Sackets. Any plans on expanding the Sackett stories? We just answered that.
Yeah,
That's
no.
at the moment, no. Let's see. Continuing. So you guys are really sweet. Thank you for all the compliments. You're very encouraging. It's really nice.
Another question mark.
There was a Western book with Sutton as the name of a character. Who was the hero of that book? Can't remember the author's name. Was that you?
Not us. We don't know.
Not a clue.
Sorry.
Let's see. I'm going along. We don't have a pen to take notes. Please post this info about the 3 versions of your dad in the book, just as a quick note so I can remember it later as I read, please.
It's in the postscript, so yes, no problem. It's already done.
And you'll feel it when you read it, actually. You will.
It's true.
Do you have any of your father's typewriters?
Yes.
Wish we could show you that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a really cool thing. Can you please just, like, in a brief moment, just explain?
Okay.
So Beau is also a detective and an archivist, and the way he figured out when Dad wrote certain things.
Okay, so one of the ways that I have to know what time period a manuscript dates from is to type a piece of it onto a sheet of paper using the same margins with different typewriters of Louis, and then to see which one looks the most the most like it. So actually having the typewriters is really, really useful because I know what typewriters he was using for different time periods. I mean, he would use a typewriter generally for 10 years or more. So it, is fairly easy to figure out the era.
The gray IBM, I think, was until I was at least 14.
Oh yeah, no, he had
From
one
forever. Like that was like 30. Like was
I've got
56
one,
to 80.
I've got one typewriter. Unfortunately, it weighs like 80 pounds.
Yeah,
I'm not
that's
going to
huge.
pick it up and wave it in front of you. But I've got one typewriter just right over to the side that he probably wrote 65 novels on.
So we'll have to take a picture and put it up
Yeah.
on the Instagram. That's a good Instagram moment. Let's see. I love when you guys do this. Thanks. What was Louis' favorite meal? That's from someone named Crispy Bacon.
I've got no idea.
He liked my brownies.
Good. There you go.
He liked the McCarthy salad at the Polo Lounge.
At the Beverly Hills Hotel
Beverly
Polo
Polo
Lounge,
Lounge.
the McCarthy salad.
And his dad was a veterinarian and could peel an apple with no meat on the peel and without breaking it. And I cannot tell you how many times walked into the kitchen to find Dad standing at the sink trying to peel an apple with no meat
Attempting,
without breaking the peel. And he got very close sometimes, but it was like his one challenge of he didn't cook. We just say that he did not cook.
Yeah, he liked chili. He was a big chili fan. Yeah.
And he crushed the saltines into it. Did he ever write more poetry?
There is some poetry that did not make it into the second edition of Smoke from the Psalter. So the Bantam edition of Smoke from the Psalter, or Random House edition of Smoke from the Psalter, has maybe twice as many poems as the original version of Smoke from the Psalter. And there are a few more poems that we'll put them on a website someday or something like that. Yeah.
There's a bunch of questions in here. Okay. Did he ever have his own mine?
We had some mining claims that I remember I did the assessment work on a couple of years. No, in Southeast Utah.
Oh, right. I remember that now.
And so, but a mine like where somebody was taking,
like we actually found anything of value,
useful things out of it, not a chance.
Let's see. That would have been so cool. Are there? Let's see. What was his favorite genre? That's interesting.
Well, I don't know. I mean, he loved writing westerns. He very, very much wanted to write other genres.
I would say he loved writing historicals.
Yeah.
Like that was something that I think, at least my experience with him, but maybe it's also because I loved history.
He read mostly nonfiction. When he read fiction, he tried to read fiction that was as different from what he wrote as possible.
He read Mysteries by Ruth Rendell.
Yeah,
I remember
kind of
that.
like armchair mystery, British armchair mystery.
Written by women.
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, I'm going down. Any chance you would finish his unfinished science fiction story? What is he thinking of? Maybe something
from one in Lost Treasures.
Lost Treasures.
I don't know. It's most of the unfinished Lost Treasures stories will probably stay unfinished, but there's one or two of them in there that I find interesting, and I feel like I know about. This is probably a good time to say this. At the moment, my rule is that I don't finish anything of Dad's where I don't understand the trajectory the story was taking, and that means that if I have an idea of how he was going to reach the end, and if I have an idea about what the character development and things like that was going to be like, then I feel like that's something that I would go ahead and do. But I may change this. I don't have I don't have an extreme position on this. But at the moment, my vision is that no one will ever create a Louis L'Amour story from scratch, except Louis L'Amour. So yeah, I might finish something. It depends on whether or not I have that vision, like I had with No Traveler Returns, where I sort of get up one morning and I kind of go, oh yeah, absolutely, no kidding, I know exactly how I'm going to do that. And not only that, but I want to invest a couple of years in it.
Okay. Let's see, I'm going. Any backstory for Crossfire Trail?
Not, if you mean like a Lost Treasures postscript, I would have to carefully research that, which is what I do with each of those. So I don't have that at the tip of my tongue right now.
Okay. Did your dad ever meet Jack Kirby?
I know that name, but I
I
can't
don't know
remember
who that is.
why.
And then it says, also, what was it like having Steve McQueen in your dad's library? Do you have a photo?
I do not have a photo. Jack Kirby, like the comics guy? If so, no. But I wish I had known him, and I wish Dad knew him. But Steve McQueen
very
was
quiet.
Yeah, it was very. So when we knew Steve McQueen, it was very late in his life.
He was already sick.
Yeah. No, I'm not sure about that.
Yeah,
I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
He was trying to kind of hide his identity, which he couldn't really do very well, and he had this big beard
and mustache and his hair,
mountain man beard and long hair. Yeah. And
a funny story.
And he was a bit overweight, and you really couldn't tell
he was Steve McQueen.
He really couldn't tell it was Steve McQueen until he looked at you, and then it was sort of like, oh my God, I've seen those eyes in the movies. You know, they just come on like flashlights.
I came in the door. I have a really quick funny story. I came in the door after school, and he was leaving, and a friend of mine was with me, and we were coming in the door, and I introduced them really quickly. I'm like, "This is Steve McQueen. This is my friend," and I introduced the two of them because we were right at the door, and I just said, "Nice to see you," and I moved on, and I got up to my room, and she said, "Who was that?" And I said, "That was Steve McQueen," and she fell to the floor, going, "Oh my God, I thought he was your gardener." Because he was wearing he had this big grizzled beard and his hair was like scraggly and he had on a flannel shirt and jeans and he's, he just was very, very, very not nondescript, but you would never recognize that face, like you said, unless he was looking straight at you.
Generally when you see movie stars dressed down, they're sort of like dressed down like, oh, you won't notice me if I dress down, but very clearly they're noticeable and they want to be noticeable at some level. He was actually kind of not so noticeable.
Now, Ed Harris was the same. I met him in the Fast Frame, and we were just standing in line, and I kept going, why do I know those eyes? Because he too had this big grizzled beard, and then I got home and went,
McQueen was a controversial character who a lot of people didn't get along with. Maybe it was just the fact that it was late in his life and he had calmed down a bit or something when he was around our house. He was nice. He was a great guy. He seemed like a really terrific guy.
He wanted to do research, and Dad said, well, you can come and do research, but you can't take anything out of my library. So he came and read at the house and studied what he was.
Yeah. There's a question that's about to disappear from our thing here, so I need to answer it. Is there a biography or autobiography available? And the answer is no. That's what I'm working on. And actually, Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures.
You're doing it again.
Is really the entire project is the first section of a biography. It's Louis' professional biography, and as I started the process of getting ready to write, kind of a personal biography, one of the things that kept slowing me down was trying to figure out what I was going to do with all of this great sort of professionally oriented material that would have completely outweighed the other part of the book or books. And so I chose to do this part first. So the entire of Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures, if you were to read it, you would have a really good vision of Louis' professional life, and it's actually intended to be kind of a random sampling of things like that.
Okay, we got a couple of questions that are going to go up to the top. Okay, is your mother still with you? Absolutely. Fiery human being.
Yeah.
Nothing stops her. She's doing great. Still in charge of everything. Okay, did he include a dedication in each book?
No.
No.
Some yes, some no.
Have you two ever thought of running writer's seminars?
I have taught a little bit.
Me too.
I find that while I enjoyed doing it, and there was a lot of, I learned a lot from doing it, it put my brain in such a technical space that it was kind of anti-artistic. And I actually found it very difficult to work in the time period when I was doing that.
That's really interesting.
And so I'm not going to do that anymore.
I still do. I teach character development. Quite honestly, it is my wheelhouse, and so occasionally I do it, and I do stuff through my Instagram, which I will be doing for the month of November. But I haven't done anything in person except this summer. I was at the Dallas Fort Worth Writers Conference teaching, and that was awesome. Let's see. How did your father go about researching geography and setting for some of his texts, especially Last of the Breed?
Okay, so Last of the Breed was obviously, those were locations he couldn't visit.
Especially in 1982.
Right. Height of the Cold War, So he used a lot of maps. Dad was, when he was active in Europe in World War II, he was in the Transportation Corps, but prior to that, when he was in training in the United States, he was trained in the tank destroyers. And what happened was he turned 34 before he was deployed, which meant he could not be deployed to a combat unit. So he had to leave the tank destroyers and go to the Transportation Corps. Anyway, while he was with the tank destroyers, he got some pretty good artillery training, which gives you a lot of maps. And so he could read a map and envision countryside from a map like almost nobody I have ever seen. He was also very good at reading books about an area and comparing what he was reading to maps so that he then would have an idea of what looked like what. So in the case of Last of the Breed, that was all intellectual research. In the case of other things, a lot of times he wrote about places where he had lived for a while, or he wrote about places that he would visit.
Let's see. Yes, Jack Kirby was co-creator of Marvel Comics and Captain America. Let's see. Okay. The Broken Gun was different. Any insight on what your dad was doing? Because it was modern day.
Yeah. Okay. So the Broken Gun was one of several sort of experiments that Dad did to stretch when he found that he couldn't get out easily, escape the Western genre and keep his publisher happy. He started trying to stretch the Western genre and how he interrelated with it. The Broken Gun was a contemporary Western, so that was an experiment. Obviously, something like Sackett's Land was also an experiment, writing a frontier story, but a frontier story that takes place in the 16th century. And so in the, throughout his career, I shouldn't say throughout his career, but after 1960 or so, after really maybe 1958 or so, he was trying to escape the traditional Western while still writing traditional Westerns so he could keep us in clothes and food and stuff like that. And so The Broken Gun was an experiment in stretching the genre.
Let's see. Have you gotten to visit places your dad wrote about? Well, we were there for some of them.
An awful lot.
An awful lot. We were there even before we understood where we were.
Right.
Did your dad make music, maybe even whistle songs?
Yes. Not so much. You might have whistled.
Not the whistling. Yeah. Not the whistling. He used to sing. He used to sing with me a lot. A lot of like cowboy songs. Red River Valley was probably one of his favorite songs. Oh, my darling Clementine. We sang a lot of things together, and he loved musicals, and he loved a lot of different kinds of music. Actually,
yeah. Dad actually
he's pretty
invested in a couple of musicals in the 1950s. And so he was a little bit involved in kind of musical, kind of big musical theater when it was a serious kind of art form that was showing up. In the
50s when it was a huge deal. Let's see. I'm just going to see. Do you still own the ranch? Yes. I'm skimming now. Okay. Are there any movies being planned not at the moment that we know of?
Well, we would know because they can't plan it without buying the rights. But planned movies are unfortunately meaningless. The only time a movie is a serious thing is the day that they start writing checks to everybody and everything shows up on the set. Before that, it's all a myth.
Did he know any country western singers? Yes.
We're really good friends with Charlie Daniels. I mean, we still are really good friends with Charlie Daniels.
And we were friends with Johnny Cash and June.
Yeah, although
Carter.
Dad, I don't know that Dad was.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we met them before Dad passed away. I remember the very first time.
I
We
see,
went to
I-
the. You weren't
I
there.
didn't. I
We went to
didn't,
the
yeah.
forum to see Johnny.
Yeah. Okay. So
Okay.
I wasn't there for that.
You
I
weren't there
actually
for that, yeah.
got to know Johnny and June pretty
When I was,
well.
like,
But
20.
it was after that.
21, 20.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a couple of years before he died, and then like one of my childhood friends is Winona Judd. What? But
That
Let's
doesn't have
see.
to do with that.
doesn't really have to do with it. Well, I mean, you know it, but not really. Were either of you in any of the TV movies? I was in two. Let's see. I'm looking to see.
Oh, actually, I was too. But
Where were you?
couldn't-
Where were you?
You couldn't see me.
Shadow Riders?
No,
Who-
I was in
which
the
one?
I was in the Diamond of Jeru, but I was like hidden behind Billy Zane's hat.
The hat that you were always trying.
Yeah. Anyway.
Okay.
So
Let's see. I'm just going back to. Is this work still being published? Yes.
yes, very
That's-
much so.
that's why we
we're
got-
here.
The brand new. I'm doing it this time. The brand new book that's coming out, I believe November 20th. You can pre-order it on Amazon right now, and that is Dad's first novel. So I think this person came in late. Let's see. I'm just looking to see. Can you scroll?
Yes.
I don't even know how to work your scroller. Where did he get the names, especially Native American, from? Ichikomi Ishia, one of my faves from Jubal Sackett. I actually know what the translation of Ichikomi Ishia is.
But do you know where you got that name?
No, but I know what the translation is.
Which suggests that you're going to tell us whether
Oh,
you
I'll
want
tell
to
you.
hear it or not.
Okay, no,
Yes,
it means pretty
surprise.
tail.
Oh.
I haven't written in a letter
Okay.
from him from the ranch.
Uh-huh. So a lot of Dad's names he got from the not necessarily Native American names, but a lot of names he got from the index to a series of books that he had on the official communications of the North and the South during the Civil War.
His volumes
so-
upon volumes.
Yeah,
upon
it's an
volumes.
enormous collection of books, but the one that he definitely used a lot was the index, because he could pull it out and it would be the names of the correspondents, and it was just this giant
List of
treasure trove
1800s names.
of 19th century names. When the Lost Treasures postscript to Last of the Breed comes out, I definitely wrote in that the name of the person that gave Dad the Joe McCatsai name for Last of the Breed, but I cannot remember the gentleman's name. But
Well, that's
I wrote it. I wrote it in the
Gentlemen,
postscript,
let's see.
so it's there.
Okay, I feel like I'm skipping things. Okay, he did not have a do not disturb policy when he was writing, but we were really good at not disturbing. But
Right.
occasionally, like we could go in and talk to him. He also tended to work out at 3:00 in the afternoon, and I think he did that because that we could go talk to him when he was
When we
working
came
out.
home from school.
We
yeah,
came home from
it's very
school.
convenient.
Yeah. So, which one of his characters would you describe Louis? Wait, would you describe Louis Wood himself be? Okay, who do we think he's most like?
Well, in his normal, in the westerns and things like that everybody's read up to this point, I would say he's really like none of them. As we were saying earlier in this process, in No Traveler Returns, right? There are three characters who are all mentioned in the afterword, and there are three characters that resemble him tremendously, and one of them
At different stages of his life.
at different stages of his
One
life.
he wasn't even that person yet.
Right, he hadn't.
It's the future.
Right,
Louis.
he hadn't even matured into that person. It's very strange. And then that same gentleman asked another question. His library still intact? Yes.
Yes. Who was his most favorite Sackett? No idea.
I think that William Tell Sackett.
Probably.
Tell Sackett is a Bruce Springsteen character. Okay.
Well, it's that
'Cause
scene
he's
when he's
kind of-
looking at the bookshelves and he can't read.
Yeah,
And he's looking at this bookshelf in Oren's house, I think.
Yeah,
and he can't read.
he tries really hard. He never really succeeds. all that much, but he's a really
Good guy.
he's a really good person, but he's definitely not somebody who's got a lot of opportunity in life.
Okay, the book about being shot down in Siberia, Scott Brown, is Last of the Breed. How much material is left that you haven't been able to go through yet?
Nothing.
He's been through everything.
Yeah.
I haven't yet.
Yeah.
Let's see. Amazing. I'm looking for things. When is the next writing seminar? You're gonna have to go look at my page for that. We won't talk about it here. We're just saying follow me on things. I'm on Instagram and I'm on Facebook and I'm on Twitter. Okay. Let's see. Scroll down. I think.
Okay. Oh,
Just looking to see.
You're at the end.
Oh, you're at the end.
Almost.
Okay. Let's see. I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything from here. I don't think so. Okay. Yeah, no, I think we're down towards the bottom, which is good because we could do. Didn't he write? Yes, he wrote detective stories. They're collected in the Hills of Homicide.
Well, no,
Then there's
they're all, there's a selection, there are these large hardbound, well now in paperback volumes of short stories called The Collected Short Stories of Louis L'Amour. And in hardcover, there is a single volume that has all of the crime stories in it. And in paperback, that volume has been broken into 2 separate books because
they're big.
I don't like paperbacks that are so giant they fall apart. Are you listening, George R. Martin? I like well-engineered paperbacks. I've been in the book business for too long.
Oh, you're so sweet. RJ Macbeth, love you guys. Thanks so much. Okay, let's see. Can you envision a museum someday?
Maybe, but what we're really trying to do is do as much as we can online. And so, looking into the depths of all of our websites, starting with louislamour.com, we really try and put a lot of things out there. And if you hunt around, you can find all kinds of stuff. I mean, you can find Louis' draft card, and you can find all kinds of interesting memorabilia, at least as close as you can get it to putting it online.
Where was his favorite place to vacation? Okay, we're getting to the end, but where was his favorite place to vacation? Did he have pets or a horse? If so, what did he name them? We had a dog for 19 years named Spring, it was Beagle, and we had another dog for like 7 years. It was a mutt, really big mutt. And Dad was always befriending the squirrels that lived in the yard and the various other animals that would come in depending on where we lived. And he had 2 squirrels that used to come every day for peanuts that he named Betty and Tom. And we had a couple of other animals that used to come by, and he was very natural at that and very good at sort of calming the savage beast, be it squirrel or dog or whatever. So he loved animals. But
okay, so we're gonna end because I think that was Facebook telling us we're done. We're not welcome any longer. I will go back through and try and answer as many questions as I can.
I think there were some from the beginning.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you. We will be doing this again at some point, but not right away. So it'll be after the holidays before we even start thinking about doing another Facebook Live. But it was really wonderful having this opportunity, and we really appreciate you all showing up.
And go buy the book because it's really good. It's really good. Not just a sister and a daughter saying that. Just I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. So thank you so much.
Take care. Happy holidays.
Good night.